Hey, it's Larry. Thanks for listening. Happy New Year. Real quick, before we get into this episode, I had such an amazing, eye-opening, life-changing experience at the World Parkinson Congress in Kyoto that I want others to have that opportunity too. So Becca Miller and I and 24 of our PD community friends have launched a year-long WPC travel grant fundraiser. We're each doing a 2-week Facebook fundraiser. Mine's underway right now because my birthday's January 9th. All the money raised will be used to help offset travel costs so more people with young onset Parkinson's can attend the next WPC in Barcelona in 2022. You can search out details on the When Life Gives You Parkinson's Facebook page or donate directly to the WPC website. Go to wpc2022.org/YOPD fund. If you or your business would like to supply matching funds, hey, good on ya. Email me at parkinsonspod@curiouscast.ca. And now, on with the show. Hi, my name is Larry Gifford. I have Parkinson's disease. It's a real downer. This is When Life Gives You Parkinson's. Joining me on this podcast journey is producer and reporter Nikki Reitmeyer.
Hello, Larry.
Hi, Nikki.
On the last full episode of this podcast, When Life Gives You Parkinson's, you had decided to try a new antidepressant that you were a little bit nervous about trying, mirtazapine. That was supposed to help you tackle some sleep issues that you were dealing with. So, how's it going?
Yeah, well, so I tried mirtazapine, a half of a pill, one night, and I felt the effects for more than 2 days. I was just in a fog the whole time, and it was uncomfortable and it was not welcome.
Yeah.
So there's all of the bottle of pills plus a half pill just tucked away on the top shelf of my cabinet because it wasn't for me.
Well, I think that anyone who's tried any kind of medications that make them drowsy know how frustrating it can be because for hours or days afterwards, you feel like you're in a haze and you don't feel like yourself. And that is frustrating.
Well, and for me, like that first night, like there was a time when my son called out and I was like trapped in my body.
Whoa.
Like you wake up and you're like, I can't move, like you're like cemented to your bed.
That's scary.
It is scary, and it's not real sleep. It's just it's fake sleep.
Yeah.
So I talked to my neurologist. He called me and said, "Hey, how's it going?" I'm like, "Oh, not so well."
Yeah.
So what we decided to do was really we kicked up my levodopa carbidopa again. So I was at 2 pills every 3 hours. Now I'm at 2.5 pills every 3 hours. And then at night, I was taking one of the extended release, which is like a double dose that's supposed to last all night. Now I'm taking 2 of those. So I've increased up to the equivalent of like 13.5 pills a day. And I actually feel really good, and I have more dexterity, and I have more energy, and I feel like my sleep is better. Not perfect, but it's better. So we're tracking that. And we're going to see how, over the course of the month, how that goes.
It seems like there's a lot of experimenting for each person who has Parkinson's to find out what the right medication is for that individual to help them tackle all of these different symptoms.
Well, yeah, it's funny as I talk to more and more people who have Parkinson's. You know, they're like, "Well, I do this and I do that," and everybody's got their own
half dose of this and 2 doses of that.
And they want to share their knowledge, but it doesn't work the same way for everybody. So, like mirtazapine works perfectly for some people. I mean, especially for sleep and for depression and for anxiety, and like it can be game changing for some people. So I'm not dismissing the power of mirtazapine. It's just not for me. Studies show that like 50% of people with Parkinson's get depression or anxiety, which is what we want to talk about on this podcast this week.
And I imagine that's due to a couple different reasons. You know, one, you are having issues with serotonin in your brain, and the other being that you've been diagnosed with a real serious disease, and that must trigger depression in some people too.
Well, sure. Like somebody tells you really bad news, you're pretty bummed out about it. You know, and there's a difference between just being bummed about something and clinical depression.
Yes.
Or clinical anxiety. You can be anxious about something and not have anxiety. But for people with Parkinson's, depression and anxiety are symptoms of the disease, not just a reaction to the diagnosis. And that's because of changes in brain chemistry. Our friends at Parkinson's Canada tells us that in addition to decreasing the amount of the available dopamine, Parkinson's also affects the circuits and neural pathways that control your moods.
So how about you?
I've got mild depression.
Okay.
So that's been diagnosed, and mild anxiety. And I'm certainly more anxious than I ever was pre-diagnosis. So like loud noises or sudden movements and stuff like I get jolted or scared. And
Really?
I've been, yes, really. And I've been in anxiety moments where for 36 hours, I'll feel like I probably shouldn't work for the rest of my life because I'm not good at what I do anymore.
That sense of impending doom, and you're not sure why.
And it's horrible. It's horrible. But mine's not as bad as some people I've met. And I want to introduce you to a group of people who have Parkinson's. They're new friends of mine, Hilary, Tony, and Johnny, all three of whom will be making return visits to the podcast.
Cool.
So you're going to get to know them over time, and you're going to love them just like I do. They have a lot of wisdom to offer as it relates to dealing with apathy, anxiety, depression, and trying to explain these hidden symptoms of Parkinson's. To start, I want you to imagine someone you love slowly changing. Think of this person. They're active, they're athletic, and they're coordinated, and the changes are just kind of subtle, incremental. Maybe it starts with some clumsiness and tripping over a doorway or a step or their shoes. The first few times you write it off to life, distracted walking. And then after several months, or in some cases years, you realize it's still happening. If this was a spouse or a sibling or a friend, you'd probably suggest they go to the doctor and get it checked out. What do you do if it's your child?
My parents actually noticed them before I did. When I was 12 years old, my parents noticed I would trip over my feet and kind of drag them a bit.
So I met Hilary Vanderliek at a Parkinson's fundraiser. Since she was old enough to play, Hilary was an athlete. Basketball, volleyball, soccer, synchronized swimming. She was an active tomboy, a preteen, unknowingly dealing with the symptoms of Parkinson's disease.
They thought I had hip alignment issues, so I started going to the doctors, and over the course of 2 years, we went through 5 or 6 doctors and eventually ended up at the UBC neurology department, and I was diagnosed with dopa-responsive dystonia, which is similar to Parkinson's, but it doesn't get worse. And so a lot of young onset Parkinson's patients have been misdiagnosed with that before being diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease.
And when were you diagnosed with YOPD?
I was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease at age 24, so that was October 2015.
You know, Larry, it's interesting that sometimes you're not the first one who notices your symptoms, that it's the people around you who notice your symptoms.
For sure. My wife noticed my walk before I really was conscious of
Really?
it. Like I was tripping over my feet, but I didn't think anything of it until she pointed it out. I'm oh, yeah. Today, Hilary's 27 years old, tall, athletic, simultaneously optimistic and realistic, and she really doesn't know life to be much different than it is.
I'm not mad that I have Parkinson's. I mean, in the moment, sometimes I feel like I can't handle it anymore. But I didn't realize how strong I was without having it. I think it's pushed me to having Parkinson's has pushed me to limits I didn't think I could handle.
What's a bad day like?
I find a bad day would be, so I take my medication every 2.5 to 3 hours. So if it's wearing off at the 2.5 hour mark, I kind of start to slow down, and I can kind of push through my symptoms sometimes and get some housework or work done on my computer. But at when it starts to get bad, I'll have to lay on I find my I give up position is lying on my stomach. I can prop a pillow up under my chest so I can kind of keep doing computer work for a bit, and then I'll be lying down for 45 minutes at a time, or more or less depending on what I've eaten in the day or how well I've slept, or if I've exercised or done too much exercise, which I'm notorious for sometimes.
God, Larry, I'm not going to lie, and maybe this is the wrong word to choose, but Parkinson's sounds like a real inconvenience.
Yeah, it sucks. There's no way around it. It's bad. As Hilary and I chatted and the conversation turned to her parents and friends and more emotional topics, her dyskinesia kicked in. And you can hear the squeaks of the swivel chair she's sitting in. The squeaking will intensify in lockstep with her uncontrolled movements.
Oh, my parents are so amazing. They basically would do anything for me, it feels like. You know what, now that you mention it, I haven't really thought about how it is on them, I don't think, as much as it is on me. I'm getting kind of twitchy, sorry.
That's okay.
Oh my gosh. I tell them all the time that I'm just so thankful for everything they do. I'm living in my dad and stepmom's basement suite right now, and they just basically are always... Sorry, I can get emotional. Yeah. My dad is just like... My dad and my stepmom and my mom are all basically there, just like a drop of a hat if I need it. Them. Yeah, especially through my anxiety, my panic attacks, it's been really hard. And so anytime I call them, they're just there to help me.
That's awesome.
So I feel like despite my situation and having Parkinson's, my situation's pretty good for just all the support I have and what I don't know, I'm going with this again, but my support is, I feel very lucky, despite having Parkinson's. Sorry, my dyskinesia gets bad when I get emotional too.
Take a breath.
I'm exhausted.
I know.
Yeah, you really can hear the squeaking of the chair in the background. I'm imagining her in my mind, her dyskinesia really kicking in and her moving uncontrollably as you're talking to her.
Yeah, it's really quite something. And it can be, if you're not familiar with it, it can be uncomfortable to be in that room. Now, I wasn't, because I'm around it quite a bit. But before I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, it would have freaked me out a little bit.
Is there a connection between the dyskinesia and an increase in panic attacks?
Not that I'm aware of, because the dyskinesia is actually a reaction to the levodopa.
See, sometimes my leg shakes when I'm anxious, but there's no connection with Parkinson's patients.
No. And so like when we think of dyskinesia as a symptom of Parkinson's, it's actually a reaction to having taken levodopa for so long.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. You heard Hilary mention panic attacks.
Yeah.
Among her Parkinson's symptoms is extreme anxiety.
I find a lot of people don't know about Parkinson's disease. It's not just physical. It's been very tough mentally for me lately too, just like pushing through episodes. I've been dealing with anxiety a lot lately again. My fear, like when my symptoms get really bad, is like getting stuck or like not being able to get help. And so I find I usually start panicking if I feel like I can't get a hold of somebody, rather than just actually having Parkinson's and just like trusting myself to sit through it. Because I start to think like, well, what if I can't get a hold of somebody? And then I don't trust myself long enough to like just sit there and breathe and wait for my medication to kick in, because it always kicks in. But I've been really focusing on, especially this week, even just trying to like be in the moment and just work through an episode at a time and trusting that I'll be okay when my medication kicks in again.
Talk about being in the moment. Is that new for you?
I actually because in my body, and when I'm like having a really bad anxiety attack or turning into a panic attack, I feel like I need something that I don't have, whether it's like someone helping me or getting water or pills or changing my outfit so I'm more comfortable, or just like needing to go to the hospital because they'll be able to help whatever issue I'm having, like feeling stuck or like shaking so bad that I can't walk, or like being so weak I just can't move to get where I need to go, rather than just like trusting my medication, knowing, as it always does, it will kick in. And just, I found, just kind of if I'm not near a mirror, I picture looking at myself in a mirror and just thinking, like, if I were to look at myself, I would think that I'm okay. Just like, just need to chill out a bit.
Yeah.
So that's being in the moment, and I just had to start just like picturing the breath going in my lungs and just really keeping it really simple and being in the moment. I remember my very first appointment with Miriam from the Parkinson Society. I started having a panic attack in the room because my medication was wearing off, and she asked me what I was thinking and what I was scared of, and I said I was scared that the building would collapse and I wouldn't be able to get help. So it's just like totally escalating my thoughts and totally not necessary. Like if the building collapses, I can deal with it then, hopefully. But I needed to just be in the moment and just focus on like my breath going in and out, or just how my body's feeling, or just think about my big toe or something that I can actually hold on to or something.
Larry, do you ever get anxiety attacks?
Yeah, strangely, it's not common for me to have anxiety attacks. I have had panic attacks in my life. I've called 911 twice for panic attacks.
Wow.
Looking back, likely related in some way. I, had one right after my diagnosis, which, you panic. I had a panic attack. It wasn't quite a panic attack, an anxiety attack just a couple of weeks ago, where I was convinced that my viability as a talent coach in the radio industry had come to an end.
Oh.
And so for about 24 hours, I was contemplating that my career was over.
Oh, man.
And I convinced myself through the anxiety that was real. And so, and then it took a while for me to like work through that and realize I can still do this.
Yeah.
But like it was a scary 24 hours.
Well, it's hard to rationalize your way out of anxiety attacks because you're not in control of what your mind is telling you at that moment.
Yeah, it is like somebody has embodied you and is making you think things that aren't your own thoughts.
So you have a disease that makes your body do things that you can't control, and you have a disease that makes your mind do things that you can't control.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. This is a roller coaster you don't want to ride. Hilary, by the way, started a nonprofit apparel line focused on mental health to benefit the Parkinson Society. The message going on her clothing line this year is, your mentality is the most important thing, which is kind of cool. You can purchase them on her website, hilaryvand.com. Hilary's first symptom was her walking.
Right.
So was mine. Some people, like my friend Tony Dawson, have hidden symptoms at first. Tony's 76, and then we met in support group. He was diagnosed nearly 6 years ago.
The initial symptoms, long before I was diagnosed, were more psychological than physical. That is, they tended to circle around a feeling of depression, which I had not been used to feeling earlier in my life, combined with some anxiety, which was more familiar to me. But I was a person who had some experience at different periods with anxiety, periods of anxiety. But depression was not my thing. I was a teacher. People thought I was one of the comments that I would continually get would be, he's enthusiastic. He was sort of throws himself into things. And it's that has kind of diminished, or did diminish. And I didn't know really what was going on. I'd retired, and so I thought, well, maybe this is an effect of retirement. And I went to see my GP, and my GP recommended me to a psychiatrist. And after some period of time, when he tried various drugs that didn't work, and he began to notice that I was tremoring a little bit, and he said, I think you should see a neurologist because I think you might have Parkinson's, which I balked at and did not like the idea of one bit. But as it turned out, he was right.
And 50% of the people diagnosed with Parkinson's have some sort of anxiety or depression.
Yes, 50%. That's half of them. And that is remarkable. I was surprised to find that it was that big. Fewer of those people actually have classic depression, and almost everybody has some kind of anxiety associated with this disease. But nevertheless, there's a lot of people who are depressed. And it's not, I should emphasize, this is not a result of knowing that you have the disease and that things are going to get worse. It's not about that at all. It's actually a symptom of the disease. It has to do with the dopamine depletion in your brain. So it's a physiological change. And yet people, of course, given the way our society regards depression, it's changing now, but there's still a lot of sort of stigma associated with depression. So people feel awkward and strange about having it. And it's important, I think, to know that it's, in this particular case anyway, it's primarily an effect of the dopamine depletion.
And for me, it kind of manifests most days as just sort of feel it's like a cloud.
Yes, and a kind of apathy, which is often associated with it. So it makes you, of course, if you're still working, I was retired, but if you're still working, it makes you less effective as a performer in your company or wherever you work.
Don't tell my boss.
No, okay. Hey, Larry, you really did this.
Man, it must be challenging, like yourself and like Tony. You know, you're diagnosed with Parkinson's, so you have so many other symptoms that you're dealing with, and then you get depression or anxiety on top of those symptoms too. I mean, that is a lot of different symptoms for one disease.
Well, and that's the thing. The people associate Parkinson's with the tremor.
Yeah.
And the rigidity and depression and anxiety and all these things you can't see. They're not considered by people who aren't familiar with the disease.
Right.
And so even as a newly diagnosed person, it's overwhelming because you're like, oh, well, I've been dealing with constipation for a year. That's part of the disease too. Like for crying out loud, what's not part of this disease?
It's
crazy.
Well, how about you? You know, how are you dealing with your depression or anxiety?
Well, I have a counselor.
Good. Yeah.
And so, we go through a lot of stuff. She talks me through situations. Certainly trying. We thought maybe the mirtazapine may help some of that. We were taking it for the sleep, but we thought it might have some positive side effects on the other things. That wasn't comfortable for me, so we stopped that. And it's just. I find talking to people, whether it's my counselor or in a support group or just conversations with my wife and my family, talking through things really helps.
You've been meeting friends from around the world too, which I think is kind of cool. You've been able to connect and to have these conversations with people in North America, in Europe, and I mean, God knows where else you're going to start finding new friends.
Well, so I was just chatting on Skype the other day with a new friend, Johnny Aitchison. He's from Ireland, now lives in England. His home is in Leicester, about an hour north of London. He was diagnosed April 4th, 2016, when he was just 41 years old. His story leading up to diagnosis is really familiar to me.
My wife noticed that there was a bit of a personality change. So it was actually her mum and dad who hadn't seen me for about 6 months, and they came over in September before I was diagnosed, and they said, what is wrong with him? He's not himself. He's not the Johnny that we know. What's going on? And I hadn't really noticed, but I seemed to be, when I came home from work in the evening, when I was sitting around the dinner table, I just was very sort of spaced out, a bit sort of what they described as being zoned out, not really communicating with people. And then the other symptom that I had was it was absolutely, I had a lot of tiredness. So I would fall asleep, at night after having worked during the day. I just thought I was overworking. But it was clear to me there was something wrong with the fact that I've got a season ticket for Leicester City Football Club, so they won the Premier League in 2016. It was a once in a lifetime event, and 2 weeks before they won the league, they were playing at home, winning really well, and I fell asleep in the middle of 32,000 people who were cheering and cheering and having the best time of their lives. So, I knew there was something wrong.
Nikki, after diagnosis, Johnny took 4 weeks off of work to figure things out.
Well, I mean, I think it was just pure shock, really. Do you know what I mean? I mean, the thing that got it for me was when the doctor got me up to walk and got me to sit down again. I was concentrating so hard not to scuff my left foot, and I sat down and he went, "You're not swinging your left arm," and I was like, I didn't even know, I hadn't even noticed. So it was clear when he said that. You know, it was clear what the diagnosis was, and then it was just numbness for weeks. You know, it was just sort of disbelief.
Do you find that people are asking you more often, how are you feeling? And how do you respond to that?
People will ask, how are you? How are you? How are things? That's the main sort of questions. I mean, and it depends who asks it. So if somebody's really interested, then I'll tell them exactly what's happening, what the sort of latest symptoms are, how they are controlled, what's the latest on the medication, that sort of thing. The people who say, "Oh, you look really well," that's very difficult to get them to understand how you're feeling, because a lot of the non-motor stuff is so invisible, you can't actually get people to understand. So I normally say to them, if you want to learn more about sort of Parkinson's, is a really good and the invisible symptoms, I refer them to that YouTube video.
That's good.
And then I said, "Do you want me to send you the link?" And some people will say no, and then others will say yes. And if they say yes, then I send them the link. And I say, "Look, I'd really appreciate it if you watch that." And then that starts to open conversation then. It's quite useful. The other phrase I would use would be, I know, thanks for saying that I look well, but, you don't see me. Sort of the person who sees me the most is my wife. And she's the one that really notices the symptoms. And I would say, "Oh yeah, but I'm doing well." But you don't see me at first thing in the morning, or you don't see me at 10:30 at night. Whenever the sort of medication's starting to wear off, and your legs and your toes are just curling and uncontrollably shaking. So it's a very delicate balance.
I thought that was so interesting what he said about invisible symptoms. It's so important to address invisible symptoms because, I imagine it could be frustrating when someone looks at you and says, "Oh, you look well," and you're going, "I am not well." Looking well and actually being well are two different things.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, people will ask me how I'm doing, and I'll say, pretty good. They go, "Well, you look great." I was like, "Yeah, I'm not going for looks."
Yeah, exactly.
I'd rather go for the feel. Yeah. How am I feeling is what you asked, and quite crappy today, thanks.
Well, and with anybody with depression, though, looks can really be deceiving because someone might look like they've got it all together and they look healthy, but we know that mental health problems are an invisible issue, or
right.
In this case, an invisible symptom.
And Johnny, in his case, he's not ever been clinically diagnosed with depression or anxiety. He describes what he experienced as bereavement for his old life. Yes. So admittedly, he is more anxious about some things now than he was before, much like myself. And he mentioned a YouTube video in the clip we listened to. And I've gone ahead and linked that video on hidden symptoms of Parkinson's on the podcast notes of this episode.
Well, it's interesting that anxiety and depression are often paired together, but to the individual, they're separate experiences.
Oh, for sure.
To find out more, our partners at Parkinson Canada connected me to Kimberly Singian, who is a registered nurse. She published a paper about depression and Parkinson's in the Canadian Medical Association Journal.
In terms of my research and my background, the depression is about 50%, 40 to 50% common in patients with Parkinson's, and it's almost similar with anxiety, but they are different in the way they are diagnosed.
Oh, so what's different about anxiety and depression?
So in terms of depression, not just the simple, "Oh, I feel sad today," because everyone has that feeling, but it's that persistent feeling and sadness that you have, feeling of fatigue, even feelings of guilt and being worthless. Your sleep can be affected, your appetite, and also your weight. It does overlap with the typical Parkinson symptoms, which is sometimes when you see Parkinson's patients, they have this flat affect. Anxiety, on the other hand, is not completely, but it does overlap with the depression symptoms. And that is dealing with the day-to-day and not, being able to almost function, and they have the feeling of, I don't want to say scared, but it makes a situation that they are in as though they're not able to complete it. So for depression and anxiety, there are barriers, I feel like, and stigma, because I feel like the patients or people, if you were to talk about it, if you are to say your feelings, you feel as though you are weak. I don't know if you can relate to that at all. So there is a stigma attached to these non-motor symptoms. I think talking about it and being aware how common it is, and it doesn't mean that you are weak. There are changes in our brain. So, and these changes, these chemical changes affect our mood. So that's almost the cause or part of the cause of why these patients are having these depressive and anxiety symptoms.
What can a person do to help cope with their depression?
In terms of treating or managing these depressive symptoms, there's two ways, and I support both. And one is talking about pharmacologic interventions. So these are medications and pills that patients are taking. But there are also non-pharmacological. So there's psychotherapy, exercise, and nutrition. What's important actually is a combination, and it doesn't mean that if your physician is saying, oh, you may have depression along with this Parkinson's, it doesn't mean that you need to start being on these medications. Because for mild and moderate levels of depression, having someone to talk to, so the psychotherapy part, the support groups, and stress management, we all need to manage our stress on a daily basis, really does help and control these symptoms. Exercise and nutrition, I feel like that is for everyone. Exercise, it helps release these chemical transmitters that are actually being affected in our body.
More exercise. It's for depression. It's for anxiety. It's for Parkinson's. Oh, my God. More. What works for me, though, is, and we talked about it, is the counseling, the support groups, some exercise, meditation, eating better, being more mindful, keeping a gratitude journal.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was an idea from my counselor, which is great. Noticing my thoughts, just how am I framing things? And that, my counselor said it's the cognitive behavior therapy. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I've heard of cognitive behavior therapy before.
Yeah.
It's interesting that she's applying those techniques to you, and it sounds like a lot of other techniques as well.
Yeah, so the cognitive behavior therapy, which sounds scary, but it's not. It's just noticing distorted thinking patterns and reframing those negative thoughts. It's just a good reminder to, like, if you're feeling bad about something, or if you suddenly everything seems negative around you, check yourself and notice how you're framing things in your mind.
Yeah, being aware of your behavior.
And seek some counseling. It's, if that's your thing, it works for me. I like it a lot.
In each episode of When Life Gives You Parkinson's, Larry talks to his wife, Rebecca.
I find it interesting how openly we're talking about depression and anxiety these days, because growing up there seemed to be a stigma about it.
Yes.
And I don't think it was ever discussed in my house.
It wasn't mine because it was present in mine with a couple of members of our family. So we talked about it. We didn't talk about it in a real open way. That said, there was certainly a stigma, and especially in society. And certainly we didn't talk about it a ton with people outside the family, outside of the trusted circle, the close friends and family.
Well, even when I had my first panic attack when my dad was very ill, I don't think that was something I shared with a lot of people because it wouldn't have been cool to have had a panic attack.
No.
Still not cool, but like I'm more willing to share that with people because it's just like, hey, everybody's got something.
Yes, and I found myself, I was writing an email to a friend who also happens to be a therapist. And saying, so I was going through a bit of a hard time for a couple of weeks there, and I don't think it was depression. But then I started to describe it, and I was like, okay, yeah, it was probably depression. Because it felt overwhelming, and like I wasn't going to get out of it. And it was just like the overwhelming gray, and couldn't see the light for the, light through the trees. And I know it was a fraction of what people who really, really experience depression or even anxiety or whatever it was, but it felt really real.
But I think that with depression and anxiety and with Parkinson's, you can't compare one experience to the other. Mm-mm. Your experience is true to you, and it's as devastating for you in that moment as it is for anybody else in their moment. And if you start comparing and contrasting how depressed we are, or how much Parkinson's do you have, or like, we need to stop measuring these things and just hit it straight on, and trust people that they're going through times, and give them the space and the support they need to do that.
Mm-hmm. The shift that happens when people learn that your anxiety, depression, the mental health issues that you're experiencing are a symptom of the disease. And it happened for me, I'll admit it. Oh, okay, well, wow, that's really different. But it's not, because people who experience chronic depression, anxiety, whatnot, it typically comes from some sort of chemical imbalance or predisposition, a genetic predisposition to those things, those disorders. And so it's really no different from what you're experiencing, but I thought about it differently, and I imagine a lot of people did, and they have when you've explained it that way to them. Oh, it's not because you're not coping with it very well, with your diagnosis very well. Stigma, judgment, perhaps attached to that. It's because it's your body doing that to you. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that I have a little bit more empathy for, in a way, right?
And the bonus is, people with Parkinson's can have both. Right. They can be depressed in reaction to the diagnosis, and then as even early in the disease, it's the chemicals in the brain get all mishmash, and the neural pathways and the circuitry in your brain, it all goes on the fritz. And it happens for me over time. Like it was just sort of this slow fade. You get a counselor one day and they start asking you questions and they go, yeah, you're borderline depressive. I'm like, oh, well, good, because I didn't have enough going on in my life.
And they want to put you on another medication. Exercise more.
Exercise
more. That'll fix it, right?
Yeah, exercise does not work for me.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about this, and this has always been kind of this freakish thing about you. And now I'm wondering if it's related to maybe your nervous system having been affected for a good portion of your life for whatever reason. But you have never responded to exercise the way that a typical person does. I exercised, maybe didn't want to, maybe felt really tired, maybe feeling sore from yesterday, but I still did some exercise today and I feel better for it. And you get the endorphin rush it kind of keeps the soreness and the pain at bay if you exercise a little too hard and all of those things. You've never experienced that, have you?
Not that I recall. I know I need to exercise. I know that that's what's going to hold the symptoms at bay, but yeah, there's nothing about it where I feel there's a rush or there's a high or that there's a takeaway. Like when you go golfing and you hit one shot over the course of 18 holes, you're like, oh, yeah, that's what it's like. Yes, okay, great. I'll do it again. There's nothing at exercise where I go, okay, that one moment of whatever. I've never had that realization.
And that never even a physical response to
the physical response is pain
and soreness and
tiredness, and yeah.
You don't get the endorphin rush.
No. I don't know. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of the disease. Maybe it's just maybe you're all freaks and I'm fine.
Well, of course.
If you or someone you know thinks depression or anxiety is something that you might be suffering from, Parkinson Canada suggests you ask yourself the following questions. Has my sleep pattern, appetite, energy level, or sexual function changed significantly? Am I more irritable and anxious than I used to be? Am I having difficulty concentrating? If the answer is yes to any of those questions, then talk to your doctor.
Next time on When Life Gives You Parkinson's. I'm walking to the Parkinson Society of British Columbia, where I have my monthly support group for newly diagnosed Parkinson's patients.
When I get into a stressful situation, my outward Parkinson's symptoms are exacerbated.
I had a bad time with tremors, and I couldn't watch hockey games, which drove me crazy because I'd get excited in the hockey game, and pretty soon my arm's just going crazy.
PD can be a good excuse for things.
It can be.
It's not a good excuse, I don't think.
This is not just tremor. This is not just stiffness. This is a whole life-encompassing problem. Having that support group of people that you can bounce ideas off of makes a big difference.
Thanks for listening. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this right now. And when you're there, give the show a great review and feel free to comment.
And you can engage with us on social media. So it's at Parkinson's Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Love seeing the people on there and having conversations. It's awesome.
Making new friends.
Or email Larry and Nikki at parkinsonspod@curiouscast.ca. I'll tell you, if you sign up for the Parkinson's Pod Twitter feed, if you become our friend, you're going to see a cartoon that Johnny Aitchison drew based on our conversation.
Cool.
So we're going to put that up there.
We also want to take a moment now to thank our podcast partner, Parkinson Canada.
Look them up online at parkinson.ca.
Keep positive.
Keep exercising.
Keep listening.
We'll talk to you next time.
Canada may be known for its landscapes and friendly people, but beneath the surface lies a darker side of crime, history, and the paranormal. Since 2017, the award-winning Dark Poutine podcast has explored the shadowy corners of the Great White North and beyond, delivering chilling tales from a uniquely Canadian perspective. Hosted by Mike Brown and Matthew Stockton with over 300 episodes and fresh releases every Monday, Dark Poutine is your weekly ticket to the creepier side of Canada. Listen to Dark Poutine on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts.